Today's story is about those 3 prisoners who chose a way of escaping from prison that in some ways was similar to the Alcatraz jailbreak. But all 3 prisoners were caught by the police one by one. Out of them, the last prisoner was caught almost 20 years later. This 3rd prisoner, who was finally caught, died inside prison at the age of 83. But throughout his entire life, he broke out of prison 18 times, his last being the California jailbreak. When this 3rd prisoner carried out the California jailbreak, he was already 60 years old. And even though there was a huge and deep ocean in front of the prison, he, along with his 2 fellow inmates, still managed to successfully execute a shocking and unbelievable escape. The story begins at California's San Quentin Prison, which was surrounded by the San Francisco Bay. The water of this bay was so deep and freezing cold that anyone who tried to swim in it for just a short while would lose their life. From this prison, whoever tried to escape either drowned in the water or was shot dead by the guards standing on the watchtowers. Because the guards had strict orders that if any prisoner was caught escaping, they should be shot on the spot. From the guards to the jailer, everyone was convinced that escaping this prison was impossible. But they had no idea that in the year 1989 something was about to happen that would change the history of this prison forever and change the way people looked at it. That year, the name of San Quentin Prison did not appear in the newspapers because of a prisoner's death, but instead for an unbelievable jailbreak, one so astonishing that no one could believe it to be true. So, who was the mastermind of this entire jailbreak? How did these 3 inmates manage to escape from such a high-security prison? And how did all 3 eventually land back in police custody? After knowing this, you too will be forced to think that if a man truly decides, he can achieve anything. The mastermind of this jailbreak was Forrest Tucker, who was by profession a bank robber. Because of this, he had been to prison many times. But every single time, he managed to escape. Later, Tucker himself admitted that out of all the jailbreaks he carried out, the California jailbreak was his best and most remarkable one. San Quentin Prison itself was a very dangerous prison where every day there were fights, violence, and bloodshed. In this place, prisoners did not only fight for survival, but also to build their dominance. This prison was filled with murderers, thieves, and rapists, and it also housed America's most dangerous criminals. Because of this, its walls were built 20 feet high, and every short distance had a watchtower where armed guards stood with shoot-to-kill orders. Escaping from his prison was nearly impossible because on 3 sides it was surrounded by walls with electric wires running through them, and on the 4th side lay the cold, deep San Francisco Bay, the same water that had already swallowed many escaping inmates. But Forrest Tucker's mind and his eyes could see what no other prisoner could. Forrest Tucker had stepped in the world of crime at a very young age. Because of this, he was sentenced many times, but each time he managed to escape, making it a total of 17 times he broke out of prison. For Tucker, escaping from prison didn't just mean freedom. He wanted to show the world that he was a master escape artist who could break out of any prison. From a young age, Tucker had also fallen into depression, and because of this he started idolizing the criminals of that era who lived life on their own terms. Slowly, Tucker too began to believe that no prison in the world could keep him locked inside. In October 1978, Tucker was sentenced to 10 years in prison for armed bank robbery and was sent to San Quentin. By this time, Tucker was already 60 years old, but his brain was still as sharp as before. For him, this sentence was like a life sentence. Because at 60 years old, by the time he got out, he would be 70. So this time, the very moment he was put in handcuffs and taken inside, he began planning his escape. San Quentin Prison had been built for inmates like Tucker, who had a history of multiple escapes. But Tucker believed that no such prison had ever been built that could hold him forever. So here too, he began looking for some way out. Quietly, he started observing every guard, every inmate, every detail of the prison. Within just a few weeks, his eyes fell on the prison's workshop. This was the workshop where prisoners worked for the state government. Tucker saw this as a chance. If he could somehow get a job here, he would be able to move around and begin preparing for his escape. But it wasn't so easy. Tucker was placed in a high-security cell. Since he was a convicted bank robber, he wasn't allowed to roam around freely. So, Tucker decided to use his age and weakness to his advantage. He started pretending to be calm, frail, and often sick. The guards soon became convinced that Tucker could never even think about escaping again. During this time, Tucker finally got a job near the wharf, a dockyard-like area where shipments and supplies arrived by boats and ships. This wharf was close to the workshop and, most importantly, was away from the main prison building. Because of this, wasn't under constant watch. Exactly the kind of place Tucker had been hoping for. Here, he quietly started planning his escape. But soon, Tucker noticed that someone else had been watching him closely. That was when the second character of the story entered, John Waller. John had already spent many years in prison. Since he had heard a lot about Tucker's previous jailbreaks, from the moment Tucker arrived, John had been keeping an eye on him. He wanted to befriend him. One day, during a work break, the two sat on a bench, silently staring at the sea. Breaking the silence, John told Tucker that he was a big fan of his escape skills and that he too wanted to be part of a great jailbreak. Hearing this, Tucker smiled, turned his face toward the ocean, and nodded. That nod meant only one thing. They would escape by swimming across the ocean. At first, John thought this was madness. But since both of them were desperate to escape this brutal prison at any cost, even madness started to look like logic. They chose the water route because neither the guards nor the warden could ever imagine any prisoner attempting it, since the same water had already claimed the lives of many before. But after some days of planning, Tucker realized that swimming was almost certain death. The waters were too deep, too cold. So, the two of them began brainstorming new ideas. And finally, Tucker came up with a plan that would change everything. They would build a boat. Hearing this, John was shocked. It was risky, it was difficult, but Tucker's philosophy was simple. An escape should be so remarkable that no one could ever forget it. And what could be more astonishing than prisoners building a boat and escaping across the ocean? The two agreed they would build a boat. John, who already worked in the prison's workshop, could easily access the tools. But their biggest challenge was keeping the plan a secret. The Pacific Ocean lay before them, with its huge waves. If they failed to time their escape with the tides, the waves would push them back to the shore, straight into the line of guards who had orders to shoot. Now, they faced many questions. How would they secretly bring the boat to the water? How would they hide in plain sight, wearing their prisoner uniforms? But Tucker, step by step, began coming up with answers no one had ever thought of before. He knew very well that if this plan failed, he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. And as his plan moved forward, Tucker began to realize something. In this plan, apart from John, one more prisoner was needed. Tucker wanted to include another inmate in his plan, someone whose mind was sharp and who could keep an eye on everything. And this is where the third prisoner of the gang entered, whose name was William McGugg. William was a 38-year-old inmate who was serving time for bank robbery and jailbreak. Just like Tucker, William had also escaped from prison before. In 1970, along with a few other prisoners, he clogged all the toilets of the San Francisco prison. And in that chaos, he escaped. Including William in the plan could be a very big risk, because the more people there were, the greater the risk that their plan would leak. And San Quentin was a prison where trusting anyone was sheer foolishness. Still, Tucker had no other option. So, trusting William, he included him in the plan. And this is how their three-man gang was formed. Although they had made the plan to build a boat, the biggest problem in front of them was, how would they build this boat? And how would they take it to the sea without the guards noticing? Tucker had spent his entire life finding flaws in prisons. And because of that, he had always managed to escape. And this time too, he was not going to stop. That is why, inside San Quentin, he began searching for that one weakness that would let them escape. After weeks of planning and struggle, one day Tucker suddenly noticed something that no one else had. He saw that watchtower number 4 had no guard, unlike the other towers that always had someone watching the prisoners and the prison. The reason for keeping this tower empty was that the prison authorities believed this area to be completely safe since it was near the sea. According to them, no one could ever escape the prison through the water route. After seeing this empty watchtower, only one thought kept circling in Tucker's mind, that they could take the boat down under this tower, straight to the water. And by the time the guard and the other towers noticed, they would already have gone far away from the shore. Now, they had to begin building a boat. But building a boat in the middle of such a high-security prison was no child's play. And this is where John came in, the second member of the gang. John worked in the prison workshop. These workshops were full of every kind of tool, since here prisoners worked on contracts for the U.S. government offices. Every worker in this workshop had access to these tools. So, over several days, John began secretly collecting every tool they would need. Among the things John gathered from the workshop were an axe, pieces of wood, sun mica sheets, and large nails. Since these workshops had plenty of stock, no one noticed when some of it went missing. But the biggest problem was, where and how would they build this boat? They needed a hidden place, because if even a hint of this reached the guards, their sentence would not only increase, but they would end up spending far more time in prison. They decided to build a 14-foot-long boat using sun mica sheets. And finally, John found a place in the corner of the workshop where they could build it. This corner was deep inside, always dark, and no one came there. From here, Tucker and John divided the plan into two parts. The first part was that while building the boat, John would play the radio loudly so that the sound of hammering and cutting would be covered. But at the same time, he had to stay extremely alert. Every 2 minutes, he had to check that no guard was approaching. It was a very risky task. In the process, John's hands were cut by blades more than 15 times. But as the boat slowly began to take shape, John's tension grew. The bigger the boat became, the harder it was to hide, because a 14-foot-long boat could not be kept hidden inside a workshop full of guards. Now, they began to realize that if they wanted this plan to succeed, they had to execute it quickly. That's when Tucker told John to finish the boat within just 1 week. While John worked on building, Tucker kept a close watch on every guard and every inmate, so that he could alert John in case of danger. And the third gang member, William, had his own job to watch the ocean tides. During this, William managed to steal a tide report from the local newspaper that came to the prison. From this, they learned on which days the sea tides were high and on which days low. Finally, William chose the date, August 9th, 1979. According to the tide report, on that day the waves would be very strong. They chose it deliberately, so their boat wouldn't hit the ground but instead rise with the waves and move forward on its own. There was another big reason behind choosing this date. On August 9th, California celebrated Marin County Yacht Club Day. On this day, many people brought their boats into the sea, and it was like a boat show. This meant that on the same day they planned to escape, there would already be many boats in the water. John warned Tucker that this was dangerous, but Tucker had a genius plan in mind. He decided they would escape on this exact day. Now only 2 days were left before their escape. Their tension and nervousness kept increasing, but many things were still unfinished, which had to be completed before time ran out. That's when they decided they would disguise themselves as yacht club members when escaping. This was the start of Tucker's genius idea. He told John and William to paint their boat the same color as the other boats that would appear in the Yacht Club Day event. Along with this, they arranged for caps so they could blend in with the members after escaping, and no one would recognize them. To row the boat, John made oars out of plastic pipes, which he attached to the lids of 5-liter gallons. Meanwhile, the boat was almost complete, but hiding it was becoming more and more difficult. To deal with this problem, they decided to keep the boat in separate parts until the day of the escape. But even after so much planning, one question remained. Would the boat even float in the water? If it didn't, they would all drown. As decided, they would only assemble the boat's parts on the day of escape. But these were not small pieces that could be hidden easily. They were large and noticeable. Slowly, time was slipping from their hands. Fear and questions kept running in Tucker's mind. How would they assemble the boat's parts? Would this boat carry the weight of 3 men and still float? Somehow, John and William managed to secretly join the boat's parts inside the workshop. But now came a most important and final stage of their plan, taking the boat to the sea without being noticed. The distance between the workshop and the seashore was about 75 meters. It was an open ground where the guards could easily see them. This was the most dangerous part of their plan. Even if they carried the 14-foot-long boat as fast as possible, it would take at least 90 seconds to reach the water. And in that time, they could easily get caught. But destiny had escape written in their fate. And this time, luck was with them. A day before the escape, John stole a royal blue spray paint from the workshop. With this, they painted the boat to match the yacht club boats. But another problem arose. The spray bottle didn't have enough paint to cover the entire boat. Now it seemed like their plan was about to fail. But Tucker wasn't someone who gave up so easily. He found a solution. He told John and William to paint only the side of the boat that would be visible to the guards. Since the paint was still less, Tucker used the remaining bit to spray their prisoner caps and uniforms as well, so that their clothes and their boat both matched the yacht club members. The most shocking thing was this idea worked. From a distance, anyone could mistake them for real members of the club rowing their boat in the sea. Tucker knew very well that once they escaped, this boat would surely fall into the hands of the police. So to taunt the guards and leave his mark, he rowed on the boat, rub-a-dub-dub. It was a nursery rhyme line meaning 3 men in a tub. Through this slogan, he wanted to mock the guards, telling them that 3 men had slipped away right under their noses in a boat. Finally, the day arrived, August 9th, 1979, the day of their escape. Tucker, John, and William entered the workshop. They put on the painted uniforms they had hidden earlier. Their boat was now ready. According to William's calculations, the boat had to be launched into the water at 1:30 p.m., exactly 15 minutes before high tide. That meant they had only 1 hour in hand to carry the boat from the workshop to the shore and get away as far as possible. Because by 2:30 p.m., there would be a roll call, and during the count, the guards would certainly realize they had escaped. So far, everything was going as planned. The boat was ready. The waves were high and strong. And most importantly, watchtower number 4 was still unmanned. But their fear and nervousness only grew stronger, because now they had to carry the boat across open ground, straight to the water. And then, fate gave them full support. Although watchtower number 4 always remained empty without a guard, every prisoner's eyes in this jail were always alert, because everyone was searching for a chance to escape. Even if they somehow managed to avoid the eyes of the guards, they still faced the danger of being spotted by fellow prisoners, who at any moment could report them to the guards. Tucker and John were stuck in a serious dilemma. They felt that the moment they pulled the boat out of the workshop, someone would see them, and they would be caught. But then, something strange and unusual happened. On the very same day, a delivery driver parked his truck near the workshop and walked to another warehouse to deliver some goods. Seeing the truck standing there, Tucker's eyes lit up. An idea suddenly struck his mind, the very idea that would allow them to escape this prison. Tucker told John to check whether the key was in the truck, and by coincidence, the driver had left the key inside. Realizing this, Tucker told John and William that they would use this truck as a cover. The plan was simple. John would sit inside the truck and drive it slowly, while Tucker and William would walk right behind it, carrying the boat under its cover. John got into the truck and started driving slowly. To anyone watching, it simply looked like the delivery driver was moving his truck. Nobody could have imagined that behind this truck, 2 prisoners were carrying a boat toward the shore. Shockingly, the plan worked. They managed to move the boat under the shadow of the truck, past watchtower number 4, and reached the shore. During the entire walk, sweat poured down their bodies. They felt as if every eye was watching them, though in reality, nobody was. Finally, they reached the shore and lowered their boat into the sea. At the same time, John parked the truck back exactly where it was, as if nothing had ever happened, and returned to his fellow inmates who were waiting at the shore. For a moment, they could hardly believe they had made it this far. It felt like a dream. But one last question still stood before them. Would the boat actually float? The boat was set in the water. Tucker climbed in first, and the boat sank slightly. William climbed in second, and the boat sank even deeper. Finally, John got in, and the edges of the boat nearly touched the water surface. The boat was barely able to hold them. Still, there was no turning back. The three began rowing with their handmade paddles. It quickly became clear that the boat would not last long. They were terrified that it might sink right in front of the guards watching from the towers. Strong winds swept across the sea, much stronger than they had expected, making it very difficult to row forward. Fear gripped them. At any moment they could sink, and if spotted by the guards, they would be shot on sight. They rowed furiously, desperate to reach the part of the sea where they could blend in with the Marin County Yacht Club members and escape unnoticed. But their boat drifted near the section of the shore where guards in Watchtower number 5 had a direct line of sight over the sea. They had to pass this danger. That was when their painted boat and painted uniforms proved their worth. Water had already started seeping into the boat, and the strong wind kept pushing them backward. The boat was slowly sinking. At that very moment, the guard in Watchtower 5 noticed them. Instead of raising the alarm, he called out to ask if they were okay. William quickly looked at his wrist, pretending to wear a watch, and shouted back, "My watch and we are all fine." Tucker's genius plan had worked. The guard was fooled into believing they were just 3 club members celebrating Marin County Yacht Club Day. Their painted boat and painted uniforms had saved them. They had now passed beyond San Quentin's guarded waters. But the boat was failing. It could not handle their combined weight along with the rising waves. Finally, it sank beneath them. The 3 clung to the broken boat and kicked frantically in the water, trying to reach land. Eventually, they dragged themselves to a shore, exhausted, shivering from the icy water. The plan hadn't worked perfectly, but they were alive and free. Standing on the shore, Tucker realized something. They had escaped only because of teamwork, but if he wanted to stay free from the police, he would have to travel alone. Without saying a word, he turned, leaving John and William behind, and disappeared into the distance. John and William stood stunned, watching him vanish. For Tucker, this was his 18th successful escape, and he was now infamous as a prison escape artist. John, meanwhile, made his way from the shore to the Larkspur Ferry Terminal, got out, and slipped into a cab. When the driver asked why he was soaking wet, John explained that his boat had sunk and he had barely made it out. As for William, nobody knew where he went. With many Marin counties nearby, the 3 prisoners simply vanished in the crowds. They had escaped successfully, but their freedom would not last long. By 2:30 p.m. that afternoon, the prison conducted its head count. The guards realized 3 prisoners were missing. Soon, Watchtower 5's guard reported seeing 3 men on a boat earlier. The pieces started coming together. A search of the workshop uncovered stolen tools, the spray paint can, and scraps of the boat. But by then it was too late. The sirens wailed, and a full manhunt began. Soon, police found the broken boat floating in the sea, with the words "Rub-a-dub-dub" painted on it. The nursery rhyme, "3 men in a tub," was Tucker's taunting signature to the guards. The escape became headline news. San Quentin was ridiculed. The warden and guards faced humiliation. Under pressure, the California State Police and local police joined forces to hunt down the fugitives. At first, authorities thought the 3 were still hiding inside the prison, unable to believe anyone had truly escaped. They searched every corner, even using dog squads in the nearby woods, but the prisoners were already long gone. Among the 3, Tucker was the true master, skilled in escapes and evading police. John and William, however, were inexperienced. That weakness showed. William was the first to be caught, just 2 months later, in October, at his girlfriend's house in San Rafael. His freedom ended there. John lasted longer, but in April 1980, police arrested him in Gilroy, California. With 2 captured, police turned all their focus to Tucker. But he was nowhere to be found. Eventually, authorities gave up waiting and began the trial of John and William. Then came a shocking verdict. Since Tucker had masterminded the entire escape and was still missing, the court acquitted John and William of the escape charges. People believe the court was secretly impressed by their daring jailbreak. Still, both men were sent back to finish their original sentences. Tucker, meanwhile, had slipped to California, committing a few robberies before vanishing again. For years, there was no sign of him, but his story wasn't over. In 1998, Tucker resurfaced in Miami, Florida. He rented a home in Palm Beach County, posing as an investment banker. He even married a woman there, convincing her he was a successful financier. She had no idea she was living with a master thief. Eventually, Tucker grew tired of living a lie. He planned one last robbery. At nearly 80 years old, he attempted to rob a bank. But this time, luck ran out. He was caught, charged with armed bank robbery. He faced trial. In October 2000, he was sentenced to 13 years in prison. Because of his failing health, he was sent to a federal medical center where he could serve his time while receiving treatment. But his body was giving up. He suffered several heart attacks, and on May 29, 2004, Tucker died behind bars.